Daniel Calloway was 42 years old, and he kept his mother's ring in a box he never opened. He drove a white Ram 1500 with a dent in the passenger door from a parking structure pillar he'd backed into 3 years ago and never had fixed, because there were always things that needed doing before a dent. He wore a canvas work jacket with a logo of Calloway Site Management on the left breast, a company he had named after his father's way of doing things, not his own, because his father had been the kind of man whose name deserved to outlast him. He was a licensed civil contractor and the owner of Calloway Site Management, a mid-sized earthworks and site preparation firm that had been operating for 14 years and had never missed a payroll. He kept his mother's ring in a cedar box on the top shelf of his closet, a plain gold band with a small oval sapphire, modest and old and irreplaceable. His mother had worn it every day from the day his father gave it to her until the day she was buried, and she had not been buried in it because she had left it to him with a note that said simply, "For whoever comes next, if she's worthy of it." He had kept the note inside the box. He had kept the box closed. He had not yet found occasion to open it. He came home on a Thursday evening in September to find the cedar box on the kitchen counter with the lid open and nothing inside it. What happened next was quiet, precise, and absolute. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen was still when he came in at 6:30. He set his keys on the hook by the door the way he always did. He saw the box immediately. It was too specific an object and too visible a location to miss. He crossed the kitchen and looked inside it. He looked at it for a moment, the way a man looks at something that cannot be what it appears to be, holding the possibility open for one more second before he lets it close. The box was empty. The note was gone too. He set it back on the counter. He walked through the house. Vanessa was not home. He called her phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He did not leave a message. He sat down at the kitchen table and looked at his hands for a moment. Then he called his accountant, not because his accountant had anything to do with jewelry, but because there are men who, in the first hour of a serious situation, know to call the person who can tell them the full shape of what they own and what can be moved. And Daniel Calloway was one of those men. He had learned that from 14 years of running a company where the difference between a manageable crisis and a catastrophic one was almost always determined by what you understood about your own position before you acted. His accountant, a man named Gerald who had been with him since year 2, picked up on the 3rd ring. Daniel said, "I need to know the current status of the deed to the house on Merriweather Lane." Gerald said he'd call back in 20 minutes. Daniel said, "Make it 10. Daniel had spent 14 years building Calloway Site Management from a leased excavator and a pickup truck into a firm with 19 employees, 12 pieces of owned equipment, and a contract pipeline that had never run dry because Daniel had never promised what he could not deliver and had never delivered less than what he promised. He had grown the firm the way his father had grown the hardware store that had kept the family stable for 30 years, by being the person that other people could count on, consistently, without drama, across every season and every difficulty. He drove the ROM instead of something newer, because the ROM had 90,000 miles left in it, and he knew this because he maintained it precisely and knew exactly what it had. He wore the canvas jacket because it was the right jacket for the work, and he had not yet worn it out. He was the kind of man who read the site conditions report before he read the contract, because the contract described what you'd agreed to do and the site conditions described what you were actually going to face, and the second document was the one that determined whether the first one was achievable. He had met Vanessa 5 years ago through a mutual friend at an industry barbecue. She was quick and warm, and had a laugh that arrived before she seemed to expect it, which he had found disarming in the best way. She worked as a residential real estate agent, a good one. Top 10 in the county by volume for 3 years running. He had married her 2 years later, in a ceremony in his aunt's backyard with 40 people, and a caterer his aunt had known for 30 years. Because that was the kind of wedding that made sense to him. He had been happy. He wanted to be exact about that, because exactness had always served him better than approximation. The marriage had been genuinely good for 3 of its 3 years. The 4th year, the year before September, had been a year he was still in the process of understanding. He had noticed things. He had the habit, built over 14 years of running a business, of noting what didn't fit the expected pattern without immediately deciding what it meant. Vanessa had been more distracted in the past year, more often on her phone in another room, more likely to give brief answers to questions about her day. He had told himself it was a difficult season in the real estate market, which was true. Rates had moved, inventory had tightened, her income had dropped. And that stress shaped behavior. He had believed that because it was possible, and because a man who runs his own business understands that a difficult market year is real and consequential and nobody's fault. He had not examined whether it was the whole explanation. He had also noticed, 2 months ago, that Vanessa had begun expressing what he had first read as admiration and later, with more data, as longing for a property she had listed in the northern part of the county. A renovated craftsman on half an acre, asking $780,000. She had mentioned it 3 times over 2 weeks. She had shown him photographs without his asking. She had said, once in a tone she may not have intended him to hear as revealing, that she had always imagined herself living somewhere like that. He had filed it. He had not opened the file. The house on Meriwether Lane, the marital home, was a 4-bedroom colonial that Daniel had purchased 7 years ago, before Vanessa. It was titled in his name alone. Vanessa had moved in when they married. The equity was $390,000 at last appraisal. Gerald called back in 9 minutes. The deed was clean. His name, no encumbrances, no liens, no changes. The property was his, exactly as it had always been. Gerald said, "Is everything all right?" Daniel said, "Not entirely. I'll call you tomorrow." He ended the call. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment longer. Then he got up, made coffee, and began thinking about what he was going to do in what order. Her name was Rosalind Akebe. She was 64. With silver-streaked locks and the kind of still, organized presence that made people feel they were in capable hands, because they were. She had been a family law and estate attorney for 31 years. She had also been Daniel's aunt's closest friend for 25 of those years, which was how he knew her name, though he had never needed her professionally before. He called her the morning after the empty cedar box. He was in his truck in the parking lot of a job site at 7:30, coffee in hand, and he told her, in the organized way he told everything, what had happened. The jewelry, the box, the note. The ring his mother had left him with a specific instruction about worthiness. Rosalind listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Come to my office at noon." He was there at 11:48. She had done some preliminary research in the interim. She set a notepad on the desk and said, "Tell me what you know about the jewelry, specifically what your mother left you, when she passed, whether it was documented in her estate." He told her. His mother had passed 3 years ago. Her estate had gone through probate. The jewelry, the ring, a pearl necklace, a gold brooch, and 2 pairs of earrings had been specifically bequeathed to him in her will, itemized with estimated values. The probate had been properly closed. The items were his by legal inheritance, not by marital acquisition. They had not entered the marital estate. Rosalind wrote this down. She said, "When you came home and found the box empty, did you speak to your wife?" "She wasn't home," he said. "She didn't come back that night." Rosalind looked at him. "She didn't come back." "No." Rosalind set her pen down. She said, "I want you to tell me everything you know about the past year. Everything that seemed not quite right. Take your time." He told her. He was organized. He had been organizing it in his mind since the night before. The distraction and the phone calls from other rooms. The declining answers. The real estate market stress as the explanation he had accepted without fully testing. The craftsman on half an acre that she had mentioned 3 times. Rosalind listened. When he finished, she said, "Do you know if she has access to properties in her professional capacity, escrow accounts, earnest money, anything that flows through accounts in her name?" He said, "She's an agent, not a broker. But her firm holds escrow and she's handled transactions where she was the sole agent of record." Rosalind made a note. She said, "I'm going to bring in a financial forensics person. Someone I use regularly. I want you to give me 48 hours before you do anything else." He said, "I need to know about the jewelry first. What are my options?" She said, "The jewelry is your inherited property. It was not marital property. If it has been sold, that is conversion, taking and disposing of property that belongs to another person. If it can be traced, it can be recovered financially. If it was sold to a dealer or auction house, there may be a paper trail." She looked at him. "Before we go there, I want to understand the full picture, because I think the jewelry may not be the only issue." He looked at her. She said, "You told me the house on Merriweather is in your name alone." He said, "Yes," she said, "and she's a real estate agent." He said, "Yes," Rosalind said, "give me 48 hours." He drove back to the job site. He managed his afternoon. He ate a sandwich in the truck at 5 Corallo because he had not eaten since morning, and he needed to think clearly, and a man cannot think clearly when he hasn't eaten. He went home. Vanessa's car was in the driveway. He went inside. She was in the kitchen. She looked at him with the expression of someone who is prepared for a conversation and is trying to determine whether the conversation has begun. He said, "Long day." He went to the refrigerator. He got a glass of water. He said, "The cedar box was empty when I got home last night." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was going to talk to you about that." He waited. She said, "I've been under a lot of pressure. The market's been impossible. I needed some liquidity. I thought it would be temporary. I was going to replace what I sold before you noticed." He looked at her. He kept his voice even. He said, "What did you sell?" She said, "The ring and the pearl necklace. The rest I still have." He said, "Where?" She said, "An estate dealer. On Mercer Street." He said, "When?" She said, 3 weeks ago." He nodded once. He finished his glass of water. He set it in the sink. He said, "I'm going to go over the site reports for tomorrow. We can talk more this weekend." He went to his office. He closed the door. He sat at his desk, and he did not look at anything for a full minute. Then he opened his laptop and began to work. Rosalind's forensic accountant was a woman named Patricia, patient, methodical, with a talent for finding the discrepancy that had been designed to stay hidden. She spent the 48 hours Rosalind had requested pulling public records and the documents Daniel could provide access to. And she found what Rosalind had suspected. Vanessa had, 4 months ago, initiated a process through her brokerage to list the property at 14 Merriweather Lane. She had not yet published the listing. She was not authorized to list a property she did not own without the owner's signed consent. She had prepared the listing documents, had set the listing price at $810,000, and had, in the draft materials, listed herself as the sole seller's agent and, in a field that Patricia had found in the draft listing agreement, had entered her own name as a co-owner of the property. She had not yet executed the listing. But the draft was dated. The work had been in progress. Patricia also found the estate dealer on Mercer Street. She called as a potential client inquiring about recent inventory. The dealer mentioned, in the easy way that dealers mention things when they believe they are speaking to a future customer, that they had recently acquired some lovely estate pieces. A sapphire ring and a pearl necklace, early 20th century. Excellent provenance. Patricia said she'd like to come in. She went in. She documented what she found. Rosalind called Daniel on Thursday morning, 46 hours after their first meeting. She said, "The ring and the necklace are at the dealer on Mercer Street. They have not yet been sold to a secondary buyer. That means they are recoverable as converted property. They are your inheritance. They were not hers to sell. And they are still in a recoverable location." She paused. The listing attempt is a more complicated matter. She did not execute the listing, so there was no transaction. But the preparation of fraudulent listing documents with a false claim of co-ownership is a professional ethics violation and potentially a civil matter. I've already drafted a complaint to the State Real Estate Licensing Board. Daniel said, "Is there anything else?" Rosalind said, Patricia found movement in a brokerage account Vanessa holds through her firm. 7 months of small transfers, between $1,800 and $4,200 each, irregular timing, into an external account Patricia is still tracing. The total is approximately $24,000. She paused. She has been planning this for longer than 3 weeks. He was quiet. He said, "I want the ring and the necklace back today." Rosalind said, "I have a demand letter ready. The dealer will return the items or face a conversion claim. They bought stolen property. They have an interest in resolving this quietly." He said, "Send it." She said, "There's one more thing I want to discuss. The house." He said, "Yes." She said, "The house is yours, titled in your name. The marriage is, as of this morning, a situation you need to decide how you want to resolve. I can help you with that, but I want you to know that as of today, before any filing, before any conversation with her, the asset position is entirely in your favor. The house, the business, the equipment, the accounts, all of it is documented, all of it is clean, and none of it has been successfully encumbered." He said, "I know." She said, "The craftsman she mentioned, the one on half an acre." He said, "What about it?" She said, "I looked it up. It's still listed." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to make a call." He didn't move fast. He moved the way he moved through a complex site preparation, with a plan, with sequence, with each phase confirmed before the next one began. The demand letter went to the estate dealer on Thursday afternoon. The dealer called Rosalind's office Friday morning. The ring and the pearl necklace were returned to Daniel by courier that same afternoon, insured, in the original cedar box, which the dealer had kept with the items. He signed the receipt. He set the box on the top shelf of his closet. He looked at it for a moment. He closed the closet door. The dissolution petition was filed the following Monday. It included the financial forensics summary, the listing document analysis, the licensing board complaint, and a dissipation claim covering the $24,000 in traced transfers. The petition was straightforward on the asset division. Because the asset division was straightforward, the house was his. The business was his. The equipment was his. Vanessa's assets consisted of her vehicle, her professional license, and the external account Patricia had traced, which held $19,400. Rosalind filed the petition on Monday morning at 9:17. At 11:04 the same morning, Daniel made a call. He called the listing broker for the Craftsman on half an acre in the northern part of the county. The asking price was $780,000. He said he was a cash buyer and he wanted to move quickly. The broker said they had another offer pending. Daniel said he'd go to $795,000, no contingencies, 30-day close. The broker said she'd get back to him within the hour. She called back in 40 minutes. He signed the purchase agreement that afternoon. He did not tell Vanessa. He did not need to. She was served with the dissolution petition the following morning. Rosalind's cover letter to her attorney noted, as a matter of professional courtesy, that the marital residence at 14 Merriweather Lane remained titled solely in Mr. Calloway's name, and that Mr. Calloway had made separate arrangements for his own housing, effective immediately, and that vacant possession of the Merriweather property would be required within 30 days per the terms of the petition. Vanessa's attorney called Rosalind the same afternoon. The call lasted 8 minutes. Rosalind relayed the substance to Daniel. They would not contest the asset division. They would accept the dissipation finding. They wanted the licensing board complaint withdrawn as part of the settlement. Rosalind said, "She's not in a position to ask for much." Daniel said, "What can she ask for?" Rosalind said, "Very little. The only marital asset in dispute is any appreciation on the Merriweather property during the marriage, but the dissipation claim offsets that almost entirely. If she accepts the full terms, the net settlement to her is approximately $8,000. Daniel said, "Give her the $8,000. Rosalind said, "You don't have to." He said, "I know. Give it to her anyway." She said, "All right." He stopped at the door of her office. He had been holding one thing since Thursday afternoon, since the cedar box had come back in the courier's hands. He had been holding it the way he held a structural calculation before he committed it to a drawing, making sure it was right before it became permanent. He said, "She sold my mother's ring because she was under pressure, and she thought I wouldn't notice, and she thought, if I did, that what she was planning would already be done." He said it without heat, the way he would note a grade error on a site plan. Here is where the reading is wrong. Here is what the correct figure is. She thought I was the kind of man who looks at what he's been given and forgets to look at what he still has. Rosalind looked at him. She was wrong about all three, he said. He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The dissolution was final 4 months after the petition. The Merriweather house sold 6 months after that, listed at $825,000, sold at $812,000, to a family with 3 children who had been looking in the neighborhood for 2 years. Daniel was not present for the closing. He did not need to be. The wire arrived in his account at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, and he saw the notification and put his phone back in his jacket. The Craftsman on half an acre needed work. Not structural work. The bones were correct. But the kind of accumulated deferred maintenance that a house carries when it has been listed and staged, but not loved. He did the work himself over 6 weekends. He refinished the floors. He repointed the chimney. He rebuilt the back porch, which had gone soft at the corner joists, because soft joists are the kind of problem that announces itself slowly and then catastrophically, and he had never had patience for the kind of patience that waits for the catastrophic announcement. He moved in on a Saturday in late February. He brought 3 boxes and the tools he kept in the truck and the cedar box, which he set on the shelf in the new closet, in the new house. Callaway Site Management had its best quarter in the firm's history in the spring. 3 major commercial site contracts running concurrently. A crew of 22. A second piece of heavy equipment purchased outright. His longest-serving foreman told him at a Friday site meeting that the crew felt the difference. Daniel asked what difference. The foreman said, "You've always been steady. Now you're settled. There's a range between those two things, and you just got to the far end of it." Daniel thought about that on the drive home. He answered every call the same day. He kept the dent in the passenger door. On a clear morning in early April, Daniel Callaway stood on the back porch of the house on the half-acre and drank his coffee. The land ran back behind the house into a stand of old oaks that he had not yet decided what to do with, which meant he was still deciding, which was the right condition for a decision that didn't need to be made yet. He thought about the cedar box on the shelf inside. He thought about his mother's note, for whoever comes next, if she's worthy of it. He thought about the word she had chosen, not deserving. Worthy, his mother had understood the difference, and he had understood it too, and he was glad that the ring was back where it belonged, on its shelf in its box, still waiting. He finished his coffee. He went inside and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.